Welcome, everyone. Tonight's event is 529 Plans, Maximizing Savings from Birth Through the Teen Years. And it's presented tonight by the folks at CollegeWell, which you're going to learn all about, and sponsored by Road to College. My name is Beth Walker. I'm so delighted to be here. Such a great opportunity to educate people and get your questions answered. I'm going to start while people are coming into the meeting by taking care of some housekeeping issues. Tonight's event is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be sent out tomorrow. This is a Zoom meeting, and as a community, we really like to see people's faces. So if you're willing to share your video, please keep yourself muted so we don't hear distracting background noises, but we'd love to see your smiling faces. And please make great use of any comments or questions in the chat feature, as I'll be monitoring that, and I'll be helping organize the questions that we'll be giving our guests. So while we're waiting for everybody to join us, let's get started with a few questions and kind of understanding who's with us tonight. So let's start by having you share in the chat, what year is your high school student in? So most people, they're finishing, but what year will they graduate? I think that's another great question to ask. If you already have a 529 plan, tell us about it. And also tell us what state you're from, because that'll really help us understand who's participating, and you might find some people are in common with you, and that may have some implications as you're going to learn. With all of that said, and as people keep coming in, I'm going to keep letting them in. I just want to remind you that we want this to be interactive. We want you to ask questions. We want you to get full value out of this. We'll be very on time. That's my job also, to keep us moving along and on our agenda. So just know that we're going to be taking care of that. So as I said, again, my name is Beth Walker, and I am the author of a new book called Buying College Better. It's my second book on the college topic. My previous one back in 2017 was Never Pay Retail for College. But this one is really focused on families making much better financial decisions as it's related to the whole college process. And you'd be surprised how much that has to do with your student. So I want to introduce you tonight to our co-hosts, all right? Joanne and Jonathan from CollegeWell, all right? They're going to give you some information and their backgrounds, but I think you're going to be fascinated with what you're going to learn about 529 plans tonight, and specifically the one that is connected with CollegeWell. So with that, I'm going to turn it over. I don't know, Jonathan, Joanne, which one of you would like to start?
I'm going to start. I'll kick it off, and I'll introduce both Jonathan and myself, and then I'll turn it over to Jonathan in a little bit. But yeah, before we get started, I just want to thank everybody for coming to the session tonight. Jonathan and I collectively have decades of experience helping families at all stages of the college planning process, starting with college saving and actually helping students all the way through student loan repayment and understanding their options on that front, parents as well. So a lot of experience. I'm really excited to be here with you tonight and talk about some strategies of how you can best save and plan to pay for college, regardless of what age your child is, because there are certain things that you can do in any year, even if you have a high school student, even if you have a high school senior. And there are some really interesting and some really good new benefits that 529 plans offer, and we'll certainly make sure to talk about those today. But they're in the name of flexibility and increased flexibility, which of course everybody wants more flexibility with how they can use their funds. But before we get started with the content, let me first introduce CollegeWell. We help people save and pay for college, as I mentioned before, but with guidance from the experts. So these are experts within our network of close to 300 colleges and universities across the country, all private institutions. These are folks that work in admissions, they work in financial aid, and we have content on all of those topics, but in the format of articles and videos, recorded live sessions like these, and calculators and tools that help you navigate all of the new trends as it relates to college enrollment, because of course, things change on that front as well, as I'm sure many of the families here tonight are well aware of that. And then we also have experts, financial advisors in our network that are sharing guidance. And these are specifically financial advisors like Beth, who work closely with families and figure out how to incorporate college savings into their holistic financial plan. Such a big consideration, because it's not piecemeal and you have to consider all of these things as a combined unit. But we don't just help families figure out how to save and pay for college. We also provide a tool. We have our own 529 plan, Private College 529, which is a prepaid 529 plan. Jonathan and I are going to talk a lot about Private College 529 throughout the session tonight. But essentially what it does is it allows families to lock in current tuition rates at all of those nearly 300 colleges and universities that I mentioned before, that network of private colleges and universities, locking in either all or a portion of current tuition rates to use in the future. No matter how much tuition increases, you're locking in those rates. So now I want to turn it over to Jonathan, who's going to talk about 529 plans in general and the differences between the different types of 529 plans, because there are different types of 529 plans. Then we're going to jump into some of the tax benefits that are available through 529s. It's one of the biggest benefits of 529 plans, of course, are the tax benefits associated with that. And then some of the ways that you can use 529 plans. And that's one of the areas where we've seen some expanded opportunities there. We're really excited to share those. Then I'm going to jump into different scenarios and saving strategies that you could use depending on the age of your child. Then we'll certainly wrap it up with questions at the end, but we'd like to take them throughout the session today. As Beth mentioned, we'd like to keep this as casual and conversational as it can possibly be. So just throw those questions out there and we'll deal with those as they come in. But first, let me just turn it over to Jonathan, who can give us a nice intro on 529 plans in general.
Great. Well, thank you, Joanne, and welcome everyone to this session this evening. Thank you to Beth, and thank you to Road to College as well. Excited to talk about 529 plans. And it was good to see many of the responses in the chat panel. It seems like many folks are already saving for college in 529 plans. I saw a few mentioned. Some other folks with younger children. Looks like you obviously here to learn. You might already be saving. And the great news about 529 plans, and the reason that they are really the gold standard when it comes to saving for college, is because of the flexibility and because that you can continue to use these plans, not only saving up to college, but through college as well. So let's start with just a high-level overview. As Joanne mentioned, there are two basic types of 529 plans. So 529 plans are tax advantage savings plans that were really designed to encourage savings for future education costs. And so these plans were created specifically for educational saving purposes. Now, in the world of 529 plans, there's really two basic types. When folks really mention 529 plans, typically they're referring to or they're thinking about the first type. And that is a 529 college savings, or sometimes called a 529 college investment plan. And I'll skip kind of the huge background and history, but essentially 529 savings or investment plans are made with after-tax dollars, just like prepaid plans are, and you are opening an account. Typically, it is the parent who's the assigned account owner. although we have seen more and more grandparents or non-parents open accounts and assigning a beneficiary. And then you are choosing where you want to or how you want to invest those funds, much like you would in a traditional brokerage account. Now, unlike a brokerage account, there's going to be, depending on the 529 plan, there might be less investment options, but it's invested in the market just like a retirement account or a brokerage account. Those funds, you choose essentially how much you are investing, and that is those funds grow tax free or tax deferred. And as long as you use those unqualified education expenses, those withdrawals are tax free. Now, that's a 529 college savings or investment plan. The other major type is a 529 prepaid plan. Now, as the name suggests, 529 prepaid plans are all about purchasing tuition in the form of credits or units or entering into a contract at today's tuition rates to save for a group of colleges that are participating in the particular prepaid plan, or in the case of private college 529 plan, close to 300 private college universities across the country. And so unlike traditional 529 plans, really the idea with prepaid plans and why they work really well and hand in hand with your traditional plans is that these plans were designed to help protect against tuition inflation and rising tuition costs while eliminating a lot of that market risk. And so that's kind of the two basic types. And, I'll just say right off the bat, one of the primary misconceptions that folks might have is that I can only have one type of 529 plan. And that is actually not the case. And in fact, they work very well together. You think about your 529 college savings plan, you have that invested in the market. It's a little more exposure to those to kind of the market volatility, the gains that you could potentially get. And on the prepaid side, you're really kind of protecting against that tuition inflation. So those are the two basic types of 529 plans. Now, when we look at them together and kind of think about some of the similarities and differences, really the similarities, the big one here and the big one with 529 plans in general, why they're such an attractive option is that tax-free growth and that tax-free withdrawal if used on qualified expenses. And so if there's one thing, and for those already saving in plans, this, it's that tax advantages. And not only are there tax-free growth and tax-free withdrawals if used on qualified expenses, depending on the state that you're making contributions in, there may be a state income tax deduction as part of making a particular contribution as well. So the opportunity for a triple tax advantage, again, not with every single one. And so, you're definitely going to want to research your own 529 plan. But really the similarities there, tax-free growth, tax-free withdrawals if used on qualified expenses. Also, another advantage of 529 plans, there's no account owner income limits. And so unlike some other specific vehicles for college savings or even some other retirement vehicles, think about a Roth IRA, that might have account owner income limits, there are no account owner income limits to save in a 529 plan. So really anyone can save in them. Again, another huge advantage and something that's available for both your traditional and your prepaid plans. Another similarity between the two is that both 529 savings and prepaid plans, the assets within that plan are considered a parental asset on the FAFSA form. And for anyone who's already in college or has a child in college, that this is important because assets, when you complete that FAFSA form, it's going to ask you a lot of questions. And if you haven't done it yet, you're getting there. We know that. But that form is going to ask a lot of questions, and one of them is going to ask about parental assets. And the good news is the FAFSA formula is very much an income-driven formula. And so 529 plans are considered a parental asset. Still need to be reported, but in terms of kind of what it counts and that impact on financial aid eligibility, not a huge impact on that. And so another misconception and something that we talk about a lot, and I'm sure that Beth talks about a lot, is that saving for college will negatively impact my ability to get financial aid. And that's really not the case. You certainly need to report that money on there, but it's not going to have a huge detriment on your that information that you're submitting on the FAFSA from that impact standpoint. And then finally, accounts owned by someone other than a parent, then grandparent, aunts, uncles, whatever, are not counted on the FAFSA form. This is a relatively new development as part of the FAFSA Simplification Act. So thinking about this, any accounts that are owned by someone other than the parent in the name of the beneficiary, so in your child's, those distributions used to be counted or used to be reported as student income on the FAFSA form, and that is not the case anymore. So that's a really, really important consideration and something that applies to both your traditional and your prepaid plans. So those are the similarities. Let's look at some of the differences. As we mentioned already, with prepaid plans, you're looking at locking in rates versus market investment. So again, some of that exposure difference. With your prepaid 529 plans, most come with a state residency requirement, either for the account owner or the beneficiary, meaning one or both have to be a resident of the state in which they are saving in that prepaid plan. The exceptions being the Massachusetts plan, as well as Private College 529 plan, which is a nationwide plan. Again, most of the prepaid plans that are still offered by states, and there's about a handful of states that still offer the prepaid plans, are designed to be saving for in-state public colleges. Now, there are obviously clauses where you can get your money out and you can kind of use on expenses outside, but in terms of the true value and benefit, it's really meant for those saving for in-state public college universities within the states that offer the prepaid plan. Many plans do have an enrollment period. And so again, that's just based on each individual state. If they do have a prepaid 529 plan, many do have an enrollment period. And then, as I mentioned, not offered in every state. And so this is something that as you're looking through, and if you're thinking about kind of balancing and opening both, and you might already be doing this, definitely look at what your state does offer, because again, not a lot of states are continuing to offer these prepaid plans.
Hey,
So
Jonathan, I
yes,
want to jump in because I think these participants brought their A game. We've
yes.
got some really good questions, and you may be addressing this later, but I just want them to know we're not ignoring you. There's a couple that I think we should hit right now. And one of them is, what happens to a state prepaid plan if your student attends college out of that state?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it will depend on each one of the state prepaid plans essentially have their own formula for determining what the value of that account is going to be, or what value of money they will get back if it's not being used at the institution, the public institution that they were saving for. So each state is going to kind of treat that a little bit differently. Now, the good news is that you're not going to lose your money. You're still going to be able to use that money for qualified expenses. But in terms of we'll call it the refund calculation, it's going to be a little bit different based on each individual state that's offering that prepaid plan if the family is not using at one of the designated institutions within the state.
Another question that I think this is a great time to be able to clarify. One of the questions that came in is, well, wait, if your child's name is on the account as a joint owner, which is a very common misunderstanding about how these plans work, how does that impact the FAFSA?
Yeah,
yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, so in most cases, it's going to be, so there's just going to be one owner on the account. There's just going to be the parent that's opening the account or the grandparent that's opening the account, and the beneficiary is going to be that named student in most cases that they're saving for. But, so again, it's kind of that there's going to be basically two names on the account, but one's going to be that designated account owner, one's going to be the beneficiary. And it's the account owner that the 529 asset is going to be reported in their name. But is that?
Yeah. And just to be clear, if the parent is the owner of the 529, they are reporting that on the FAFSA. Right. If it's any adult other than the parent, and it's not the student, because it's very uncommon to have the student also be the owner of the 529,
correct,
then it's financial aid invisible under the new rules. So I think that's an important distinction. We also got a question, and this gets back to the standard savings investment 529 versus prepaid. If a college or a university offers a prepaid tuition plan, and I think this is where language really matters, okay? because you can enroll a student in a school and you might have the opportunity to get like a tuition lock
Yes.
where but that's different than the prepaid plan. So the question was,
Yeah.
can I use a standard savings investment 529 for expenses that I would also use a prepaid plan for? Just talk about the differences, because you made the comment you could have both.
Yeah, absolutely. So, right. So it comes down to use on qualified educational expenses. Now yes.
No, that is another question, and I think this is a perfect time to clarify it. What's a qualified expense?
Yeah, so we can actually go to the next slide because we actually address the qualified
Love it.
education expenses there. Yeah, and so they are expanding, but qualified educational expenses, tuition, mandatory fees, the cost of textbooks, supplies, required equipment, special needs services in the case of a special needs beneficiary, computers, also food and housing as long as the beneficiaries at least have time. Now I'll circle back to the previous question you just said. The reason that prepaid 529 plans work very well in conjunction with your traditional 529 plans is that with prepaid plans, in most cases, there's very few exceptions. You are prepaying and saving for tuition and in some cases mandatory fees. And so that's kind of you're tracking, you're prepaying, you're protecting against that tuition inflation. 529, traditional 529 college savings or college investing plans, you can use on tuition and mandatory fees. You can also use on all of these other qualified expenses as well. And so that's really kind of I think, a really important distinction. Now, that being said, much like there's that refund value or that withdrawal value for if you're saving in a state prepaid plan and you're using at a non-state institution to use, you can use those funds for any one of these qualified expenses in the prepaid plan. But really the goal of them and where you're going to get the most bang for your buck is that you're paying and you're locking in for those tuition mandatory fees. So that's kind of, I think that's really the reason that they work really well together. And then I also don't know, and I'll just to throw another kink in the plant, or just another thought bubble in there. One of the other things to know about, and this is less on the saving side, but some institutions, when you do get there to the institution, essentially they might have an option to what you pay freshman year is you're essentially locking that in and paying sophomore, junior, and senior year. So that's less on the saving side, but that's just something to be aware of as well as you get a little closer.
Yeah, and Jonathan, I'll just add on to that because think you could look at that a couple of different ways. But one thing, if the question was really related to the type of prepayment plan, that's really not a 529 prepaid plan, but just something that the college or university set up, you wouldn't be able to take a large distribution from your 529 plan and use it for that purpose for qualified expenses for one thing, but also for the amount that you distribute. And we'll talk a little bit more about it when it comes time to using the funds. They have to be used for expenses that are occurred during that calendar year without impacting a tax penalty. So that's an important consideration. But also, and when we get into more of the strategy, so this will come up a little bit later too, but it is possible if you are seeing one of the colleges on the private college 529 plan list, if you're seeing one of those close to 300 colleges and you say, oh, I've been saving in a 529 savings plan, and let's say it's your state plan, and now you're looking at that list and you're saying, oh gosh, my son or daughter is going to apply to at least a handful of these schools, you could roll funds over from your 529 savings plan into a prepaid plan without impacting any tax at all. It would be a direct rollover or an indirect rollover, as long as that is from one 529 plan to another. There's no tax impact or penalty.
Absolutely. So just to round out this section, and so we talked about qualified expenses, and as we say in parentheses, they also are expanding. And so 529 plans, one of those, I would say, rare pieces of legislation that when there's updates, it seems to be, knock on wood, seems to continue to expand and add more value and flexibility. So recent changes, and some of these are less recent, some are more recent, but you can now use up to $10,000 per year per beneficiary for K through 12 expenses. And so again, this would be if you have a son or daughter that's going to K through 12 private and you have those tuition expenses, up to $10,000 per year per beneficiary can be used on those K through 12 expenses without incurring any tax liability.
Depending on the state. I live in
Depending on the state,
Colorado,
yes.
and our unenlightened government doesn't allow that here. So
Yeah,
just
no, thank you.
food for thought.
That's a very good point. Yes, definitely check at the state level, because that is not the case at every.
Along those lines, just quickly, could they be used for dual credit college courses taken before high school graduation? Again, I think that's going to be a state law issue.
Yep.
Because a lot of times dual credit is all administered through the high school, but it is college credit. And so that might be one of those gray areas. I don't know if you've seen a lot of that or not.
I have not personally. That would be something that I would have to look a little more in depth myself. So great question. Yeah, but I would imagine it much like kind of the state decision on the $10,000, for the K-12 expenses, the same would apply with dual credit. But that's something that we can definitely look up.
And keep the questions coming. We're not ignoring them, but we're going to address some of them by going through the slides. So we'll come back. We won't leave anything unanswered.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Another expansion up to $10,000 for student loan repayment. And so this is another expansion of use for those 529 funds. And obviously for certain individuals, we know that borrowing is a reality. And so being able to use some of those funds for student loan repayment is just a really, really great benefit.
And to be clear, that's a total. It's not $10,000 per year. It's $10,000 towards student loan debt, period.
Yep. One time, different than obviously the $10,000 per year per beneficiary for K-12 expenses. That is one. And then the newest option, and certainly if you're finding yourself in you've been a super saver, you've been someone that's kind of been ahead of the game, which is awesome news. But the newest piece of legislation with Secure 2.0 is that you can now roll over a portion of your 529 funds from that 529 plan into a Roth IRA. So any leftover funds you can roll into a Roth IRA. And so if you think about this, right, talking about flexibility, talking about use K through 12, that's a little bit earlier in the stage. And so not as much time for growth. Student loan repayment, it's that one time. But this newest piece of legislation, that rollover from that 529 plan into the Roth up to a maximum of $35,000 is just another great benefit. And it allows you, again, if you find yourself in this situation, you're saying you can set up the child that you've been saving for, because it has to be in the beneficiary's name, that Roth IRA, subject to the, Roth restrictions and rollover amounts, or excuse me, contribution amounts that are, in place for every year. But that allows you to kind of set them up and move from one, post-tax vehicle to another one, and kind of kickstart and get them saving for another very important thing, retirement. And so that is, again, that's another piece of legislation that just went through. It's, January 1st, 2024 is the first time that you were allowed to do that. And this was just another way that you can utilize those funds if you find yourself with leftover funds. So qualified expenses, there's a lot there. They continue to expand. And so just a really, really great value, and it adds to the benefit of 529 plans, which so many of you know. So I'm going to turn it back over to Joanne now that we talked about that, and she's going to talk more about college saving tips for every age. And yes, keep the questions coming, and I'm going to hop into the chat panel now.
Keep them coming. I answered, I think, a couple live and then one in the chat. There are a lot coming in, which is really great. So we'll address those as quickly as we can, as much as we possibly can. But we're going to jump into college saving tips now for every stage and sort of different groups of ages. And a lot of what we've already talked about you'll hear repeated here again, but just want to, also insert some specific strategies that might be really helpful for you if you find yourself in one of these categories. So if you find yourself, and we do have folks here that are that do have young children and they want to get started as early as possible, that is the right message. Get started as early as possible. Just start saving. Even if you don't have a savings goal or a strategy in mind, or you're not even 100% sure, like, where should I be putting this money? Just start saving money and start putting money aside. Take advantage of the longer runway that you have. Time is more on your side to allow that savings to grow, and make that money work for you. Explore 529 plans because of the tax benefits that are associated with those. In addition to the growth that you can experience, similar to other savings vehicles, those tax benefits can actually save you thousands more. Because of the tax relief that's associated with those. So make that money work for you by taking advantage as much as you possibly can of 529 plans. The first, when looking at 529 plans, I always say start with your state. So there are almost every state, except for Wyoming, has their own 529 plan. And there are over 30 states do offer, in addition to those federal tax benefits, about 30 states offer state benefits for contributions, and that's either a credit or a deduction. So the federal benefits are on the growth, and when you take the money out, there's no federal tax on those distributions. There's no credit or deduction for contributions. If that does happen, that would be on the state side, and there are about 30 states that offer, or over 30 states that offer some sort of tax credit or deduction. If you live in one of the 9 states that offers tax parity, and that's Arizona, it's Arkansas, Kansas, Maine, Missouri, Montana, Minnesota, Pennsylvania, and Ohio. If you live in one of those states, you can contribute to any 529 plan and still potentially take advantage of your state credit or tax deduction. Most other states, you do have to contribute to your state tax plan. So we say start there because you want to take advantage of all the tax benefits that you possibly can. And at this stage, just look at your budget and see what you can set aside as you're continuing to work toward your other saving goals like retirement. But just start saving as much as you can. I know from personal experience, as somebody who's saving for 2 children for college, at this age, there isn't a lot of room, right? There's not a lot of extra. And this is when you might want to incorporate some of those other family members to help you with saving, right? So what you can do is you can say, all right, well, maybe I can set up, $100 or, $150, $300 a month, whatever that happens to be based on your personal circumstances. Set it and forget it. Set it up in an auto contribution plan. Most of these plans will allow you to use monthly. We also offer quarterly or annual contributions where you can set that right up and it happens automatically, deposited right into your account. And that's one way that you can set it and, kind of forget it at least for a few years until you need to check back in on that strategy. In the meantime, invite other people to contribute. Maybe your parents, the grandparents, your siblings, the children's aunts and uncles. As Jonathan mentioned, there are some new benefits, right? Those are not factored in to the financial aid formula, specifically the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid, the FAFSA, it's 529 plans that are owned by someone other than a parent are not reported on that form and factored into financial aid eligibility. So certainly some nice benefits there. And there's some good news too. CSBN, the College Savings Plan Network, and it's a network of all 529 plans. They do a number of different studies, both for parents and students. And they just recently conducted a youth survey. And they found that there's an increasing number of students, and this was high school students, so they're a little bit older, but an increasing number of students, close to 3/4, would much rather have gifts for education than other material items. And 80% of those students wanted their parents, or thought it'd be a really great idea for their parents to also invite other people to give and contribute to their account. So take advantage of those. All 529 plans have that functionality. When Private College 529 unveiled are gifting opportunities. Basically, you log into your account, you establish a customized email you can send to anybody that you'd like. There is a dedicated link. So if somebody clicks on that link and they contribute, it goes right into your 529 account. You can grab that link, you can text it, you can share it on social media if you want to, but it's just a great way for other people in your children's lives to show how much education is important to them, and their future is also important. So take advantage of some of those strategies to boost your savings earlier on. If you start with your state 529 plan, that's great, right? You're saving, you're taking advantage of those tax benefits. If you live in one of the 8 states that does offer a state 529 prepaid plan, and you think your child might attend one of those state-based institutions, as Jonathan mentioned, most prepaid plans are for in-state use, then take a look at that, especially if you want to add stability in your college savings portfolio. If you think your son or daughter might attend one of the institutions in Private College 529 plans list, you could establish that account as well as saving in your state 529 plan. Let's move on to strategies for elementary and middle school families. At this time, you're going to of course, keep saving. The keep saving happens all the way throughout until you're approaching and even into college, as Jonathan mentioned earlier. But as your son or daughter starts to enter into elementary and middle school, maybe now is a good time to sit down with that financial advisor and take a look at your investments and make sure that that portfolio is on track with your plans and how many years you have until college. So, for example, most 529 college savings plans, they have investment options that are called glide paths that just automatically become a little bit more conservative over time as your child nears college age. That might be something that's attractive to you. Again, this is what you would have that conversation with your financial advisor to make sure that you're invested in the right plan for you based on your larger financial picture. And within that plan, you're invested in the right investment portfolio. And now is also a really good time to talk about, what is that college savings number? What is that goal? And we'll take a look at how you can do that on the next slide. This is also the time in our lives where expenses change. And I put a question mark there because for my personal experiences, when my children went off to elementary school and my childcare expenses decreased, I only found that I had different expenses at that time, right? Both of my children are in, travel sports, and that's very expensive. So we had to be really diligent about college savings and really make it a priority in our family because we just expected to have this onslaught of more discretionary money at that point. We just found, no, there are other expenses. We had to really stay focused, and your financial advisor can help you do that as well. But let's start talking a little bit about how do you arrive at a college savings number? And this works for those that are in elementary, middle school, or have children in elementary, middle school, really at any stage. But it's important to start looking at college costs and looking at a big range of college costs. So look at expenses for your 4-year Ivy League institutions. Also, on the opposite end of the spectrum, look at the all-in costs for your community college, right? And everywhere in between, your in-state schools, out-of-state schools, other 4-year private colleges and universities. And you'll find that there's a very big range there. Unfortunately, sometimes what happens is that families will eliminate some of these 4-year private colleges because of that sticker price. But the truth is that the majority of families do not pay that sticker price because of financial aid opportunities. And you can get a pretty good estimate of how much your family might be eligible for by using a couple of tools. One would be the College Scorecard. And on College Scorecard, you can find every college on there that offers financial aid, so virtually every single institution. And what they do is they provide a range of financial aid that you might be eligible for based on different income bands. But if you're looking for more, that's pretty general. If you're looking for more of a customized number, I recommend you go directly to the net price calculator on the college's website. And the colleges are required, federally required, to provide this, and it has to be easy to find. What you do is you essentially provide information about your income and your assets, both for the student and the parents, almost like you're filling out a mini financial aid form. And the results of that calculator are an estimate based on historical packaging policies. Now, some of these net price calculators can be more sophisticated and incorporate even grades and test scores, depending on whether or not the institution also offers merit-based financial aid. But that's where you're going to get a really good early estimate of what might be my net costs for my family to attend these different institutions. When we subtract that, then we get that's our net cost right there. And then we need to factor in other sources or other resources to help us meet expenses. There are other scholarships. I mean, if a child is young, you probably don't know about that yet. But if you're a parent of a junior or senior and you expect some scholarships, you expect some tuition assistance, perhaps from an employer, you want to make sure to factor that in too. Are you expecting that the student is going to borrow maybe their minimum or their maximum, I should say, federal eligibility for federal loans? That's $27,000, right? That's the max that they can borrow as an undergraduate student. If you think that you want them to borrow that and have some skin in the game for their education, right, then you don't need to be saving and planning for that. Many families also take advantage of payment plans when they're paying for college. And these are interest free. It's one of the best ways to pay for college outside of saving. And so we encourage families to take advantage of that as well. So if you, again, you're a parent of a junior and senior and I don't need to, I'm going to be setting up money in a payment plan, that's going to help reduce or shave off some of my expenses and reduce how much I have to save. Then once you have that college savings number, you get to decide, does that work for you? Do you plan to save and cover maybe 50% of your son or daughter's education? That's your saving number at that point. And then you want to, again, look at your college savings strategy, look at the different vehicles that you're using to save for college. Are we still in the right plan? Talk to your financial advisor. Are we still set up in the right investment portfolio in our 529 savings plan? At this stage, our child is starting to get a little bit older now. Do we see them attending one of their state institutions? Do we have a prepaid plan for a state institution? Or perhaps are they planning on attending one of these institutions on the private college 529 list? Should we consider opening an account at this point and locking in tuition and having some more stability in our college savings portfolio? Let's move on to high school families, and we're going to spend some time here and on the next slide with those who are in college age, because I know there are a lot of folks here in the session that are at this stage right now. As we're approaching college, and the college search hopefully has started around, I would say, the sophomore and junior year. In the sophomore and junior year, or I like to think of when you're starting to search for colleges in the sophomore year, maybe early in the junior year before you start visiting, I like to think of it as, eliminating types of colleges, because it can be kind of overwhelming to think about, like, which of these 4,000 colleges and universities in the country should I send my son or daughter to, right? So I like to think about it as, let's eliminate entire types of institutions. Maybe we know that a small liberal arts institution isn't the right fit, or maybe we know that a large research institution or that's set in a city setting isn't the right fit for us. So we can start to eliminate different types of schools. And then as you continue with that search, we know most families approach sort of whittling down that college list from an academic standpoint. So we've all heard about making sure that your son or daughter is applying to a balanced list of colleges academically. So you have your reach institutions where the grades and the standardized test scores might be a little bit higher, or they admit students with a little bit higher standardized grades and standardized test scores than your student has. That would be considered a reach institution. Or your Ivy League institutions are reach institutions for everyone, right? And at the opposite end of the spectrum, then you have your other institutions that are less selective. So that's a balanced list academically, right? You also need to approach that list from a financial standpoint as well. And you can't just look at the sticker price. You have to consider the net price. So this is when we're going to go back to those net price calculators. We're going to play around with those numbers and really see what is going to be a good fit. This is also a really great time to involve students in the conversation and also in the savings. So as students have part-time and summer jobs, encourage them to set aside money. Set aside, they're going to have expenses for books and supplies. They're going to need money for just spending money, right? So, off-campus events, things that things they need to spend money on, spending money in college, they should start setting aside money for that. Involve them in this process. It gets them encouraged and excited about college as well. Also, as they start to near the end of college, start to near the end of high school in the senior year, that's when you want to encourage them to get really involved and apply for as many private scholarships as they possibly can. Now, you may have heard, don't apply for outside scholarships because it's going to impact your eligibility for financial aid. Colleges are required. They have to factor those in to the financial aid package. That's federal law. They can't get around it. And resources cannot exceed your cost of attendance or your financial need, really. Resources, your outside resources cannot exceed your eligibility for financial aid. And so sometimes they do have to make room for those, but it usually works out to the student's advantage because they'll eliminate loans or work study, not so much the free stuff. That's typically how it works. So encourage them to apply for as many outside scholarships as they possibly can. This is also a really great time to have a conversation with students about your financial capability as a family. And what you're able to contribute toward college. And when you go into it with your eyes wide open, it just eliminates heartache in the spring of the senior year when a student may land on that dream college and then it doesn't work out financially. If you start having these conversations earlier, it can lessen that quite a bit. At this point, again, go back to that financial advisor. I can't stress that enough. Let's make sure that savings portfolio is becoming more conservative as the child is nearing college age. You don't want what happened in 2020, where there's a significant hit in the market, right? And families saw a significant hit to their 529 accounts. And if they had a senior at that time in 2020, then they had to make some tough decisions, right? Do we start using this now? Do we wait? And do we hold on? Do we let this climb back? But traditionally, you don't want to have too much market risk toward the senior year. So make sure that your investment portfolios are aligned with that. You can, if you are a parent of a junior or a senior in high school, and maybe now that your son or daughter is going to attend one of the colleges that is on our list. And this would be especially true for parents of high school seniors at this point. If you've committed to a college that's on our list, you could open an account and contribute to private college 529 plan and lock in rates to use for the later years of college. So what Jonathan was talking about earlier is so important. You don't have to stop saving when your kids hit high school or late high school. You can even start saving now as the parent of a high school senior in private college 529 and lock in rates for the senior year. There is that 36-month hold period from when you open and contribute to your account before you can use it. So that's why if you lock in rates in your senior year of high school, you could use it in the senior year of college. And eliminate several years of increases, which could be, anywhere from 3 to 5% on average each year. You're locking that in. So that is a strategy that families have used in the past, and would encourage you to use again if you find yourself in that situation. Now, as you're approaching college, and now you have money set aside, you have to determine how am I going to use these funds, and that the question oftentimes comes up, especially if families haven't saved for all of college expenses. And by the way, most families don't. So please don't feel bad if you're in that situation as well. Actually, the national average for our 529 savings is between $26,000 and $29,000, right? So most families are not saving for the full cost of education. And so when their child gets there, they have to decide how and when to use that. As the account owner, you have 100% control. I mean, you could take a distribution anytime you wanted to from that plan, but you want to make sure that you follow specific rules so that you're not hit with a tax penalty or a liability. So essentially the way this works, and you're going to work with your advisor about this, we're keeping that theme consistent throughout. When it comes time to start taking distributions, make sure you're talking to your financial advisor or a financial advisor about this, because essentially the way this works is that you can't take more than your costs for the calendar year. What that means is that is your qualified expenses directly from, let's use the college or university in this example. So we're going to be talking about higher education expenses at this point. So those qualified education expenses that Jonathan mentioned at the college, so that's tuition and fees, it's room and board if you're over half time, room and board expenses, even if you're living off campus. That was a question that came up before. Even if you're living at off campus, you can typically use the amount that the college will budget for on-campus room and board housing. So you are limited to that amount. But books and supplies, etc. So all of those expenses, you add those up, then you subtract any tax-free scholarships, grants, tuition, assistance programs, maybe from a parent employer. You also have to subtract any expenses that are used for eligibility for the American Opportunity Tax Credit or the Lifetime Learning Credit. And that's when it starts to get a little bit more complicated, and you want to speak to a tax professional about this to make sure that you're not taking out too much. But essentially, all of that needs to happen within the same calendar year. And so think about it this way, and how colleges typically bill. Colleges typically bill one semester at a time. For the fall semester, they typically bill in July. And for the spring semester, they typically bill in December. So payments made through December 30th, right, would count toward that calendar year as long as those expenses are happening during the calendar year. But it is important that you're at least aware of these requirements and these factors so that you're asking the right questions when the time comes. I'm not expecting you to remember this. Just make sure that you remember to ask the questions of a tax professional or a financial advisor when you get to that stage. Now, there are some other factors too. I mean, we talked about 2020 and what happened in that year when the market took a dive, right? And unfortunately, some families did see a dip in their 529 savings accounts, right? Those accounts that are tied to the market. It wouldn't happen with prepaid plans that are not tied to the market, that are tied to tuition increases. But for those plans that are tied to the market where they did see the dip, at that point, some families may have said, you know what, I'm not going to take a distribution right now. I'm going to wait and see if that climbs back. But then I ask, well, what are the other plans? How are we going to meet those expenses if you're not using that 529? So if the answer at that point is, well, we're going to borrow, so then we have some other considerations that we have to factor in. So in one of those, of course, is what are the interest rates currently on borrowing? So next year, so for families that are starting to borrow or borrowing for next year for the 24-25 year, the interest rate on federal student loans did increase a full percent. So they're around 6.5% for undergraduate students. For parents, it's 9%. And on most of these loans, so the majority of these loans for the students and for the parents, they are unsubsidized. So there's a small portion of subsidized student loans where interest doesn't accrue while the students are in school. But in most cases, these loans are interest is occurring accruing while the student is enrolled. And so that is just, these are additional finance charges that are adding on to your balance. And so in that consideration, you may decide, I don't want to take that loan. The interest rates are so high, so I'm going to be taking money from my 529 plan. Or maybe I want to take advantage or see what I can set up in a monthly payment plan at that school to eliminate some of that bill before I pull from my 529 plan, or before I borrow. Also, the type of 529 plan that you have matters. So if you have a prepaid plan and you're using that for tuition, you're going to take a distribution to use for the tuition portion and maybe use your 529 savings for other expenses. If the student plans to go to graduate school, you know that now, perhaps you want to use that 529 prepaid plan for undergraduate tuition, and you could save the funds in your 529 savings plan for graduate expenses, because you could use it for graduate tuition as well, and other expenses. So these are just some of the considerations that you need to be thinking about as you are about to take distributions from that 529 plan. So I want to leave this here. I know we didn't have a lot of time for questions on the end, but it does look like we were answering questions in the chat throughout. So I noticed that Beth, you didn't stop me, so I'm assuming that a lot of that conversation was happening over in the chat panel. But I do want to leave this here and encourage for folks to take a look at Private College 529 plan if you haven't hopped over to the website. And see if this is something that could work for you, depending on the stage that you're at with your own college savings plans and strategies. As we mentioned, we have nearly 300 colleges and universities that participate. And unlike some of the state prepaid plans, you can use it at any of those 300 colleges and universities across the country. It is a nationwide plan. You're not locked into any one school. So you can take your prepaid savings to any college in the plan. You don't have to pick just one when you start saving. We also want to make sure, right, Beth, to mention that we are offering, as part of our 529 plan, and in the month of May, we are offering a sweepstakes, the 2K Parent Promise Giveaway, which we are offering one winner $2,000 in a Private College 529 plan account. So if you already have an account, great. If you don't, that's okay too, because if you do win, you can establish an account and we'll give you $2,000, potentially be eligible to win $2,000. So I know Beth is including a link in that. So go ahead and enter. We have one winner that we can award the 2,000 Parent Promise giveaway. And we wish you the best of luck if you enter. And again, thank you so much for joining our session tonight.
Joanne, Jonathan, I can't thank you enough. We did have a lot of great questions. And what I'm going to say is a couple of things. Number one, yes, this is recorded. The link will be shared tomorrow. That question's been asked over and over again, and I want to assure you that you'll have the opportunity to watch it back because it's a lot of really good information. But I also want to, just remind everybody, Road to College, who sponsored this and invited these folks in, they're just like a one-stop place for you to go get all kinds of information. They do events like this. They have a Paying for College 101 Facebook group. They're just your place to go to find the resources that are going to answer your questions. So there's a lot of questions that are coming in about, well, what if we have more than one child? Or what if I move to a different state? I want to simplify this for you. This is a big expense. This is a big purchase that you're going to make. this is an appropriate time for you to work with a financial advisor to get those questions answered. It's an appropriate time for you to talk to a tax advisor that is very familiar with the ins and outs of all these programs, because doing this right can save you a small fortune. So I just want to thank all of you who joined us tonight, because you're doing the right thing. You're educating yourself on the complexities of all of this. I'll leave you with one thought, and it's a paradigm shift that I'm trying to create in my new book, Buying College Better. I wish I could get every American household to buy college like they buy a house. We've outsourced our affordability exercise to mortgage lenders and auto lenders. And we routinely hand over financial information and leave it to them to calculate and tell us, here's how much you can afford to pay me back. Here's how much you can afford to pay for this big purchase. But we don't use that same consumer mindset when it comes to college, and we should. So if we could just adopt the philosophy that, hey, number one, I need to understand how much college I can afford. Number two, I probably need to know what my kiddo is going to study. And number three, I need to understand where they're likely to get in at a discounted cost and be able to afford it. And when I think about 529 plans, I think about that being the down payment, okay, on the house. And so there are ways for us to be so smart about it. If we've identified the right schools to apply to, if we've set aside the money that allow us to get there, if the kid shows up in the right way, this is very affordable, but it doesn't happen overnight. I think the message that you heard from Jonathan, Joanne, is this is intentional. You have to really give this some thought. But these are some awesome tools for you to use. And I would highly encourage you to visit Private College 529. And I would tell you CollegeWell is a great resource. So thank you all for joining us. That'll conclude the program. And Road to College looks forward to providing you with even more value moving forward. Good night.